Hello, and welcome to part 2 of 4 of Unpopular Opinions. Lyme disease treatment should not be a war zone. If you haven't seen the previous video or videos, I urge you to do so to provide the best experience and understanding of this full video project. All the previous videos are linked in the description. Before we jump into the different theories of chronic Lyme symptoms, I want to remind everyone watching that while giving feedback on your feelings in the comments is good, using the comments to mass essay post, be aggressive, gaslight, or manipulate is not. If your comment does not follow these 3 rules, it will be deleted or removed. I understand that personal beliefs can lead to difficult discussions. If done with the intent to help someone understand your perspective while being open to understanding their perspective, it can be great. But these conversations should happen outside of the comment section. If you want to have a longer discussion with myself or another commenter, reach out to them privately and respectfully to engage in a further conversation. According to the CDC, or the Center of Disease Control, most patients recover completely when treated with the 2 to 4 week course of oral antibiotics from Lyme disease, but about 5 to 10% can have prolonged symptoms of fatigue, body aches, or difficulty thinking as a result of their infection. Patients with prolonged symptoms due to Lyme disease usually get better over time, they say, but for those that don't, the condition where patients experience prolonged symptoms due to Lyme disease became known as post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, or PTLDS. And according to the CDC, its cause is currently unknown. The CDC continued that prolonged symptoms are not caused by an ongoing bacterial infection, when in fact, the cause is not currently known. Some patients and medical professionals strongly disagree with the CDC that the cause is unknown, as they feel that the bacteria is still currently living inside the treated patient's body. Those medical professionals created a diagnosis term for their beliefs named chronic Lyme disease, or CLD. From the rise of long-term symptoms after the initial antibiotic treatment of Lyme disease, the medical community was very divided on its validity and proposed treatments. To understand the difference between the 2 theories, I made this visual to show the similarities and differences. The 2 similarities of PTLDS and CLD are the source of the disease and the typical symptoms. The source, as discussed earlier in part 1, is the Borrelia burgdorferi bacteria, BB bacteria, found in infested ticks that transmit the bacteria to secondary hosts such as squirrels, mice, raccoons, and birds. When the infected tick feeds off a human host, the human becomes an incidental host because, traditionally, humans were not in the tick's environment. As for typical chronic symptoms of PTLDS, it includes severe headaches, neck stiffness, additional EM rashes over the body, facial palsy, which is a loss of muscle tone or droop in one or both sides of the face, arthritis with severe joint pain and swelling, intermittent pain in the tendons, muscles, joints, bones, heart palpitations or irregular heartbeat, also known as Lyme carditis, episodes of dizziness or shortness of breath, inflammation of the brain and spinal cord, nerve pain, shooting pains, numbness, and a tingling in the hands and feet. These symptoms are the same with those that believe in chronic Lyme disease. The 3 main differences between PTLDS and CLD involve the diagnosis, the symptom cause, and the suggested treatment. According to the CDC, which sets standards for the testing and treatment of Lyme worldwide, diagnosing the BB bacteria in Lyme disease is typically done through a standard 2-tier testing using enzyme immunoassays, or EIA, as the first step, and a Western blotting, WB, for the second step. Increasingly, laboratories are using a modified 2-tier testing, which are both EIAs. For the CDC to recognize a positive result of the BB infection, the test must have 5 of the following 10 antigen bands, which are 18, 21, 28, 30, 39, 41, 43, 38, 66, and 93. An antigen band is a marker that tells your immune system whether something in your body is harmful or not. While the same 2-tier testing is used for medical professionals who believe in chronic Lyme disease, They also believe that the current standard of diagnosing the bacteria is outdated and advocate for new testing methods, some which are used today. These medical professionals attest that the CDC's Western blot test does not include two antigen markers labeled number 31 and 34, which are highly specific for Lyme. These professionals claim the cause of this omission is due to the development of two Lyme vaccines that were being developed in the late 1990s that use these two protein markers specifically. So if a person was vaccinated with these vaccines, which were called LymeRix by SmithKline Beecham and Immuline by Pasteur-Merckx Cononot, and you took a Western blot test, the number 31 and 34 markers would show positive every time. The Immuline vaccine was never offered to the general public, and LymeRix was only publicly offered from December 1998 to 2002. The CDC, National Institute of Health, NIH, and Infectious Diseases of America, IDSA, refute this claim. To illustrate this, an article on Lyme Science about why the number 31 and 34 bands are not in Lyme disease tests. In this article, they state, Lyme disease conspiracy theories merge with anti-vaccine conspiracy theories to falsely claim that bands were removed because of the Lyme disease vaccine. They continue, LymeRix was a safe and effective vaccine that has been FDA approved since 1998, but the vaccine manufacturer stopped selling it for business reasons in 2002. In a 2021 article by Time magazine, a different perspective was given. They say the FDA approved LymeRix in 1988, but with a great deal of ambivalence. Even after the vaccine's approval, members of the CDC Advisory Committee disparagingly called it a yuppie vaccine. A Health Journal article referenced in the Time magazine article about this advisory committee reported that the trials also produced a disturbing picture of the inaccuracy of clinical diagnosis. In both trials, only a small fraction of initially suspected cases were confirmed as definite Lyme disease. Chronic Lyme advocates equate these low numbers to inefficient testing. The article continues, Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices ACIP member Paul Offit noted that it was highly unusual for such a lukewarm recommendation to be given to a vaccine approved by the FDA. At the time of the FDA's licensing of LymeRix, there were only limited data on the vaccine's long-term safety and the duration of immunity. Since the rationale for a vaccine against what was reported a mild and easily treated disease affecting small populations, SmithKline Beecham agreed to set up a novel HMO, or a health management organization-based surveillance system. At the time of licensing, regulators and others were quite concerned that the vaccine might induce an autoimmune reaction that would result in arthritis and other complications resembling the late complications of Lyme disease. Dr. Leigner, a chronic Lyme advocate, provided an additional perspective about the development of the 1998 Lyme vaccine. He said, in order to qualify a vaccine, it's much more helpful to have a fairly simplistic model where you can easily tell who has the disease and who doesn't have the disease. And furthermore, you banish the notion that the infection can persist despite application of treatment. If you acknowledge those biological realities, it makes it considerably more difficult to qualify for a vaccine. Now, separate of the disagreement about antigen markers and the 1998 Lyme vaccine, the Lyme Science article continued that the short answer was the number 31 and 34 markers aren't that useful for predicting Lyme disease. In one study by the NIH, they said bands 31 and 34 were only detected in about 15% of Lyme samples and about 2% of samples from healthy people. This study reference was done in 1992. The article continued that patients who have had Lyme disease for longer than 4 to 6 weeks, especially those with later stages of illness involving the brain or the joints, will almost always test positive with marker 31 and 34. The article continued, stating a patient who has been ill for months or years and has a negative test almost certainly does not have Lyme disease as the cause of their symptoms, and that serologic, or study of serum and other body fluids and diagnoses, testing is generally not useful or recommended for patients with just a single EME rash. For this manifestation, a clinical diagnosis alone is recommended. At the end of this article, it references 3 sources, 2 which are now outdated CDC web pages, and a 2011 article by Dr. Barbara Johnson that states, the bands at the 31 and 34 KDA positions of Immublots are produced by the OSPA and the OSPB. It has been recognized since the early 1990s that antibodies to an OSPA and an OSPB are infrequently detected, and when they are observed, it is usually in patients with long-standing Lyme arthritis. With this information, along with other reports, has led advocates of chronic Lyme to routinely attest that it does not make sense to continue withhold the number 31 and 34 antigen markers for testing, especially as there has not been a publicly offered vaccine in 22 years. They also believe that there has been progress made on other testing methods, including direct detection, rather than solely on antibodies. Dr. Linger, as quoted earlier, explained in an interview that progress of Lyme tests that use direct detection are more sensitive and which don't rely on antibodies. There's been a real bias against using those methods or any direct detection methods. They've all been marginalized. So, because some testing types aren't approved by the CDC, this has led medical professionals to diagnose patients with chronic Lyme disease without a CDC-approved positive diagnosis of the BB bacteria and begin treatment based on clinical evaluation of symptoms and additional testing methods that produce a positive test. Now, in regards to the cause of the symptoms, a study done in 2023 stated that PTLDS may be due to the development of an underlying autoimmune condition after treatment with antibiotics. Furthermore, reports of Lyme disease have expanded in the last decade, showing marked spread into previously non-endemic areas. They concluded that the bacteria is no longer in the body and the resulting symptoms could be caused by that body's autoimmune condition, while those who believe in CLD claim the bacteria is still in the body, even after the 2 to 4 weeks of treatment of the initial infection, or if a person is diagnosed by a test that shows that the BB bacteria markers long after the initial bite or infection, which continues to live in the body. In 2 separate studies led by Dr. Eva Sappi, her research team analyzed whether the BB bacteria could remain after antibiotic treatment. The first study done in 2016 found that the bacteria does form a very organized biofilm in vitro, meaning in a petri dish, test tube, or outside the living organism, and that the biofilm provides a refuge from the antimicrobial treatment. In the second study, which was done 3 years later in 2019, they found that the Borrelia can persist in a human body not only in the spirochetal, but also in the antibiotic-resistant biofilm form, even after long-term antibiotic treatment. With these results, it showed scientific evidence that the bacteria can linger even after antibiotic treatment. As of June 2024, the CDC states that there are no specific treatments or cures for chronic symptoms following an infection of Lyme. However, management and treatment approaches for people with ME or chronic fatigue syndrome can be helpful, they say. Extended or long-term treatment with antibiotics is extremely discouraged, and the CDC provides studies reporting inefficient results on treating symptoms with long-term antibiotics. They also report that the research is being done to find treatments and possible vaccines. However, medical professionals and patients who believe in CLD have utilized the following treatments: long-term antibiotics, stem cell therapy, blood treatment, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, gelshin therapy, natural treatments, and Lyme protocols, to which some patients have found success, but not all. Now, these 2 differences in opinions have greatly divided the approach of how the general medical community approaches treating Lyme disease and its chronic symptoms since its discovery in 1975, which unfortunately has made it more difficult for those who actually suffer from the long-term symptoms of a Lyme infection. Here I have some examples of past research and opinions that show the divisiveness between the 2 different theories. These 3 studies and articles are from 2006, 2012, and 2015. They all had the similar focus that those believing in chronic Lyme disease or CLD are being deceived. In the 2006 article, the researchers found that there is no well-accepted definition of post-Lyme disease syndrome. This has contributed to confusion and controversy and a lack of firm data. An attempt to provide a framework for future research on this subject and to reduce diagnostic ambiguity in study populations, a definition for post-Lyme treatment syndrome is proposed in Table 5. Now, 6 years later, in 2012, an article by Dr. Alwater and Dr. Malia found that although science has not supported the concept of chronic Lyme disease, the entity has continued to draw favor amongst some patients, healthcare providers, media, and politicians, despite, or perhaps due to, the controversy. Although one can have understandable empathy for individuals suffering regardless of the cause, it is clear that such Lyme disease activists are strongly waging a war against evidence-based medicine. And lastly, in the 2015 article by Dr. Lantos, concluded that a limitation of modern medicine is our ability to explain and treat chronic pain, fatigue, and other disabling symptoms. It should come as no surprise from those suffering from these symptoms have placed their hopes in treatable conditions. Controversies such as that over CLD are likely to persist for as long as patients suffer from poorly explained disabling symptoms. We must hope that future research will provide better explanations and safe, effective treatments. While these excerpts of these articles appear antagonistic and judgmental, I did not write them, so I don't want to assume. When I looked deeper, I saw a basic concern for the patient suffering from their symptoms and advocating for better research, even if their delivery of these feelings appears harsh. While I do believe that both sides of this issue in the medical, health management organizations, and pharmaceutical communities regarding Lyme disease have individuals who berate, gaslight, and take advantage of patients, which is wrong, I feel these conflicts portrayed in commercial or social media overshadow what is trying to be done in good faith to improve diagnostic testing methods and treatment. This was made more apparent to me and the medical community once the COVID-19 virus became a pandemic in March 2020, which will be explained in part 3.